And we should be live. Welcome. My name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek, and this is a Facebook Live. And if all things are going correct, just making sure things are coming through. Just turning off some of the audio as it goes. Thank you very much to Jeremy McPeak for inviting me to talk to the Digital Devils and answer a few of your questions. I know if you've already left questions in the comments, so I'll get started there. But if you're just tuning in now, either from the class or from the wider internet, welcome. So I'll get started, and if I'm sort of moving around, hopefully I can read the comments and those kind of things. I'll get started with Jeremy's first question / comment, as I'm trying to get them to open up. Let's see if I can work this, and I will try to figure it out. It is hard trying to drive a live stream and then also be looking at the comments, but Jeremy asked me to sort of first of all talk about my background and how I got started and how I started Sports Geek. So I'll give you a quick rundown. There is a podcast, Sports Geek Origins, where I do go through the full backstory if you want the full 45-minute experience. But the short version is for 15 years I was a geek. I was a coder and a developer, and then after I sort of finished that career, I was a frustrated sports fan in what was being delivered into the sports space. So I thought I'd take those tech, IT, development skills into the world of sport and help sports industry overall in helping them with websites and CRMs and those kind of things, because that's what I'd been doing. And the whole social media revolution came. So that's what I often use the joke. That's back when Jeremy's Twitter handle was Sun's Webmaster. And so digital teams are starting to form, and so I found myself providing digital strategy and advice to the sports market on how to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and that evolved into broader sports digital strategy. So that's the Sports Geek origin story. From a podcasting point of view, I know there's been a few questions around podcasts. I started my podcast, Sports Geek. Well, the Sports Geek podcast, it's had a rebrand and a rename. I started that in 2014. I'm now 180 episodes in, where I interview sports executives from both here in Australia, where I'm based. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, but also in the US. Jeremy's been one of my guests. It took a little while to get that organised, but then also in Europe. Talking to people who work in the sports business behind the scenes, whether it's in the digital space or the technology space, the marketing and commercial. So yeah, I want to try to go through this, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to handle the questions and try to get to them all. If I don't get to them all, my apologies. I'll do my best. I'll answer them on the chat. What I'm trying to do, and this is where I've got it open in another thing, and it's only showing me half the comments. So what I'm going to do is I'm on this other screen. I'm going to give me the full version. So if you've got a question, leave it in the comments, and I'm going to be doing my best to answer them as I go. Now I am actually looking for some confirmation that everything seems to be working. There are people joining. I can now see some more comments. I was missing a bunch of comments. So to give a bit of background again, to finish off with Jeremy's question, what do I do now? So yes, I'm a podcaster, but podcasting is primarily the marketing platform and the marketing channel for Sports Geek. From a work day-to-day point of view, I'm now working on sports digital strategy for either clubs or leagues, and advising them either on content, what type of content they should be producing, looking at what audiences they should be developing and targeting, whether it be with content or with potential offers, and then also spending a lot of time now in the commercialization, so helping sports rights holders understand the content they're producing, who it's for, how to value it, and then how to pitch that, put it all together to pitch it back to a sponsor to make money. So I'm really focused on helping the digital teams around the world make money. If they make more money, then everyone's happier. We can get more resources, that kind of thing. Thank you very much, Josh Clark, for actually saying it's working, because I've been speaking here for 10 minutes or so, and I don't know. So I guess that's the initial answer for Jeremy. And this is where the Facebook Live, if you've ever done it, the comments flow down, and if you're trying to catch up and the more comments come in, it gets harder to catch up. So I'm going to do my best. Hopefully I have not said your name wrong. Hungry Lee, asking about, I've interviewed hundreds of executives around the world. Curious if I've interviewed any European soccer-related people and soccer, even though it's not popular in the United States. Well, I first of all, I disagree with you there. I think the world of the world game, football, or soccer as it is known in the US, is growing in the US, and I have been lucky to have some European football guests on. Richard Clark. There you go. I've mashed them together. Richard Clark, who was at Arsenal, and then Chris Harris, who's also at Arsenal. I've also spoken to Adam Bader and at Real Madrid, and a few others, to name a few. And again, I'm going to miss some guests, but go back and look at the archives around European sport. What I like talking to them about is it's different than the US and the Australian sports scene. It's very tribal. It's not as commercialized from a stadium point of view, but from a digital point of view and what they're trying to do, doing some amazing things. So, and European soccer clubs are their own entity, so they've got bigger global strategies. So if you look at the conversation I had with Andrew Collins from Mailman and the work that they're doing in China, a lot of the European sports clubs are probably ahead of the US side of things in pushing out their global strategy. So that would be some of my answers to that. And I was also lucky enough to catch up with a few people while I was in Europe recently. So it was good to catch up with Casper at FC Copenhagen and sort of learn a little bit about the Danish Football League and that kind of stuff. So hopefully that answers your question, Hungry. Best of luck. Hopefully you get extra credit by referencing this pod or referencing this live video. Chris, again, I'm going to apologise for mispronouncing everyone's name. What are some strategies of work when it comes to social media posts? Well, it's a bit of the how long's a bit of string, and it depends. But if I'm looking at Facebook particularly, we've done a lot of work around understanding the Facebook ads product. So personally, from a Sports Geek point of view, and Jolly, who works here at Sports Geek, is now running a lot of campaigns to make sure that that people who should be listening to the podcast are listening to the podcast. Now, the question might be who should be listening to it. It's pretty well defined. I want my past clients, current clients, and future clients to be listening to the podcast. So if you work in the world of sports business, or want to work in the world of sports business, or currently do work in there, and you think I could be of help, that's who I want to be listening. So that's the primary piece. Then from an advertising point of view, we make sure that we run a post engagement campaign to make sure people who already liked either my content or the Sports Geek page, we make sure they see it. And so they might put a like on a post, but they're most likely listening to it on their podcast player. And then what we'll do is, once we've built up some good like equity, lots of people liking it, then what we can do is then send that post to people who've never heard of me before. And so they will see a post of Sean talks to Chris Harris from Arsenal, and it'll have 250 likes. And so I'll go, oh, cool, I'll go check it out. So it's been very effective to use Facebook and the ads product. And again, not massive amounts of money, but just enough to target the right people. And that process is a process that we use also with the sports teams to help them understand how to sell tickets, the cheeks on the seats, as I say in the podcast. So engage people, and then once they're engaged, you can drive them to your site or potentially sell them something. So thanks for that question, Chris. Ryan asks, thank you. Oh, thank you again. Thank you for your question. Love listening to Sportscast to hear different opinions of different topics. Who are some favourite people that have joined you on the podcast, and who are the some you'd like to get on the show. Thank you very much, Ryan. It's a bit like asking me who is my favourite child. The answer will be all of them have been great. But if I have to pick out a few highlights, definitely interviewing Mark Cuban and talking to him about the sports business and sports technology. That was episode 62. It's an old episode now, but it's still complete. I still think it pretty much holds up. I joked for many years that Mark Cuban was a sports geek like myself. He just had a little bit more money, and I sort of say that for now. So Mark Cuban has always been a highlight, but then also getting some guests, early on guests of big sports teams, like Richard Clark, working at Arsenal, to email me and give me some advice. That was amazing that, someone like Richard, who was working at Arsenal, was listening. And then, and I'm not just saying it because these people are on, but Jeremy was a good guest. TJ Ansley, who I did a podcast with when he was in his car, but again, still great quality content. So I really did enjoy, one that I really enjoyed probably more recently, and again, it's probably getting a while. It was Joe Gottfried at Maple Leaf Sports, because he's doing a lot of stuff that I'm doing in that digital commercialization, doing a lot of great stuff, and so is Jen Van Dyke at the Clippers. So again, for the people I've missed, I apologise. I now owe about 148 guests a beer, but that's fine. I'm more than happy to buy them a beer. So where I'm at, Ryan, I've just answered that. Evelyn, quickly going through. How do I formulate questions to ask guests? Do you have any tips on to guide the conversation if the interview goes flat, uninterested, poor communicator, or unwilling to share? So I do. So how do I formulate? So I get some prep done around, and Jolly sort of does a bit of internet research. Most of the time I know the person, what they're doing and what their work is. So Jolly goes and does some internet research, gives me a few links to look at. The broad strokes of the interview are, I want to know your background, how you got there, what you're currently been doing that's really cool. And then we either dive into the weeds on how they did it, or we sort of stay in that 30,000 foot view strategy on why they did it and what they're trying to do. And that's about it. I then go into, and the next question comes from the conversation and where they're passionate about. If they want to talk about a particular platform, then we'll dive in on that. I think the only interview that I did a lot of prep for and had a lot of questions for was the Mark Cuban interview, even though I didn't need to prepare because I'd known what Mark was doing and followed his career. But even then, once I got going, and again, you can sort of listen, I had a few opening questions to get the ball rolling. For me, it's how I respond to them and then how they respond to my response is what I look for. And so if we're having a really good conversation and they're enjoying it and I'm enjoying it, then the listeners will enjoy it. If I don't enjoy it, then the listeners won't enjoy it. So the only times that I might redirect it, sometimes I'll just take a tangent, but most of the time it's a pretty cool conversation, and it's just them talking about what they're good at and what they're passionate about, and most people can talk about what they're passionate about. So thanks for that, Evelyn. Carly, biggest question would be, how'd you get the position you're in today? In other words, bit of background. Well, if you're tuning in late, but I've sort of done a little bit of that. How'd I get here? I'll tell you a little bit of a longer story. Like at the age of 21, I nearly dropped out of university to go work in sport. I was 6 months away from finishing my IT developer, IT career, Bachelor of IT, and I nearly left. And I didn't, went and finished, went in and worked in IT as a developer, like I said, for 15 years. Now, had I left then and had 15 years of working in sports, I would be in a different position. I would be in a similar position as Jeremy, that we're in the sports in an early space. Whereas I was lucky enough to have and of course, someone calls me. So thank you very much. Shout out to my good friend Steve Sammartino for calling me during a live stream. I really do suggest, this is not I really do suggest you all Google Steve Sammartino and get his latest book. It's well worth a read. He didn't just call me to get a shout out on the podcast, on the live video. But I think I'm only in the position to be sports geek is because I've had the technology background, and I think that gave me an advantage when I was trying to figure out what is Facebook trying to do, what is Twitter trying to do, what is Instagram trying to do. And it gave me that advantage because I was looking at it from a tech point of view as much as the marketing, whereas a lot of people who are new to the space are looking from a marketing point of view. So how did I get here? A unique background, and then the other part is I've networked like crazy and connecting with as many people as possible to find out, one, what they're doing and how they're doing it, and then to build a relationship with those people. So thank you very much for your question, Carly. Like I said, there's a digital Sports Geek Origins, and what I'll do is I'll go back to these notes and put a few more links in here. What are the key points for making a good podcast? Yang asks. Make it interesting and make it informative, or make it entertaining. But it also, for me, it comes down to the audience. Now, I can tell someone, hey, listen to my podcast. And I say it's about sports and digital and marketing and technology. And if they have no interest in that, to them, it's not a good podcast. So the key point for me of making a good podcast is to know your own audience and what they want and make the podcast for them. Podcast is very much a niche play, or niche, if you will, for the people in America. You're doing it for a smaller audience. It's not mass market. My podcast is not going to be for everyone. Now, if you're in digital, you can listen to it. If you're in marketing, you can listen to it. If you like sports, you can listen to it, and you will get value. But it doesn't. My podcast doesn't attract those people. So for me, know your audience. Julian asks, if there anyone you would want to have on has not been on yet, who would it be? So I've got after securing Mark Cuban as a big whale guest, I guess. There is a few others. I'd like to interview Bill Simmons from The Ringer. I think he's doing great. I think he's doing really good things in the media space. Back when he was doing Grantland at ESPN, and now with The Ringer, I'd like to interview Bill. I'd like to interview Steve Ballmer, again, a sports tech guy. He's gone from running Microsoft to buying the Clippers. So they're on my list. They're on my impossible list, which I look forward to ticking them off. So that would be two that I would put in there. Was it tough getting started, and what is something you wish you knew starting out? So there's probably two ways. So yeah, it's always tough to get started. Either with Sports Geek. So I think I started Sports Geek again in 2009. And my first 6 to 9 months was telling people, hey, everybody, you need a Sports Geek. You need someone that understands the digital platforms, how to talk to people, how to talk to these fans in this digital space. And no one believed it. And again, a shout out to Jeremy. There was digital teams of one. They were the webmaster. They didn't have all these complete digital teams. And so I was there talking to marketing departments and communications departments and CEOs saying, you need people and staff to service and talk to these fans on these platforms. So that was the tough bit. The tough bit was telling people, hey, you need a Sports Geek. And then it's, then as the momentum started, people saying, oh, can you come and help us with it? And that's sort of the momentum builder that happened. But early on, it was tough, but you have to I had to keep staying the course. You asked, thanks for the Facebook Live, no worries. My question, what if an audience is not active during a live podcast? What should you do? So I don't. I don't do a lot of live stuff. This is pretty rare. We were just trying to figure out how I best do this conversation / lecture / talk to you guys. And I said, well, why don't I use Facebook Live? And so I'm using OBS, which is an open source broadcasting kit with my Mac, and I've got my normal recording kit. So I don't normally do live stuff, and so I don't get the feedback from a podcast. So podcasts are great. I love podcasts. I listen to them all the time. I listen to a whole bunch of different podcasts. But people listen to podcasts when they're driving to work, or commuting, or walking, or running, or exercising, and it doesn't lend itself to that second screen as much as TV and video does. So when I put a shout out and say, hey, let me know, everybody, what conferences I should be at, what should I speak at, there's a bit of a 1 or 2 day lag or a week lag on when people read it. So It's a funny one. The engagement of, and going to a conference, and it's well worth following. A conference called Podcast Movement. I've been there the last 2 years. Yeah, the whole how do you engage your audience is a not problem's the wrong word, but it's always a something that you've got to think about as a podcaster. So I do all my engagement via social, whether that's via Twitter, via LinkedIn. I connect a lot of my listeners via LinkedIn, and those kind of things. So that's how I go about getting engagement and making sure there's an active audience. And then, as I said before, using Facebook ads to make sure people find out that I've just done a really good interview with so-and-so, because then that gets them back. So again, ticking through, Todd Cafflish, thank you very much for joining the video. Todd's a good friend of mine and looking forward to catching up with him when he's down in Melbourne soon. Done a couple of podcasts with Todd. If you want to be connecting with someone that knows the sports technology scene, listen to those pods and connect with Todd. So thank you very much for your kind word, Todd. G'day again, TJ. Thank you very much. So Xavier, thanks for taking the time. What are the biggest future trends you see gaining interest in the world of digital strategy in sports? So I think the current one, and it's one that's a conversation that we've been having in the Sports Biz Slack. So I've got a sports business Slack group that where people who work in sports biz or want to work in sports biz are chatting. You're more than welcome to join sportsgeekhq.com/Slack. Jolie will add you to things. So the biggest trend at the minute is the move to video and how and where the platforms will play out and how TV's changing and TV rights. Like even this morning, LAFC went and signed with YouTube TV. That kind of thing. What Facebook's doing with Facebook Watch, where YouTube will end up playing, where other platforms end up. So we're seeing the digital players now play in the same space as traditional TV, and so the sports rights and the digital rights, that kind of thing, is going to be a consistent theme for the next 18 months, especially as TV rights deals and that come up for different things. So that's I think video is still and who buys video is going to continue to be one of the biggest things to look at. And then if you want to throw in another trend, it's how does sports get into the world of esports? So looking at what Riot Games and that are doing with League of Legends and how much they're killing it, and what the NBA and now MLS and NHL and how they're all building out their own e-leagues. How gaming and sports can live together. So Yang asked another question. My question, what are your key points and how to make more? I think I answered that one before. Sean, you obviously make a living from sports podcasts. Where does most of your revenue come from to keep yourself running? So that's from Dallas. It's a good question, and it's one that I have to sometimes correct people. So I make, I don't take any money from an advertising point of view from the podcast. So if you looked at the accounting books, the podcast brings in zero revenue. So all my revenue is digital strategy and projects and consulting work with teams and leagues and brands and athletes. But if it was zero, I wouldn't keep doing it. So going back to my point of who listens, it's my guest. My guests are my past, current, and future clients. So it drives revenue by driving in leads and building me and Sportsgeek as a thought leader in the space. So that's how I keep the revenue coming in. So so effectively, Sportsgeek is the biggest advertiser on the podcast. If I went back, and I have, I can put hundreds of thousands of dollars back to attribute that back to Sportsgeek, because I might have someone listening for 60 episodes and they just call up and say, okay, Sean, we're ready to go. And I'll go, ready to go where? And they're like, oh no, we're ready to start working. So that's effectively how I've monetized podcasting. I know, there's other podcasters that run ads or promote things, which is another valid method. It just hasn't been one that I've gone down. I've either gone down promoting myself and promoting the business and the services, as well as sometimes doing some partnerships like I've done with Tradable Bits and things like that. So Josh asked, do I wish I left college tech earlier and worked in the sports earlier? No, I don't, because again, like I said, I wouldn't have the unique skill set that I have now, and I wouldn't. Yeah, I'd be a different person, but I wouldn't have the skills that best suited for the time that I started Sports Geek. So, right place, right time, and right experience. Hey, Gibbo. Yeah, I've put a jacket on because I put it on a camera. So thank you very much. What was the first 6 months like on your adventure? Thank you very much, Haley. Yeah, it was hard yakka. Like, again, I was blogging a lot and connecting with a lot of people and making connections on LinkedIn, and being a bit of a resource to the industry, but then also pushing my services. So yeah, it was as we would say in Australia, it was tough yakka. It was hard work, but I guess the following 6 months and now 8 years or 9 years as it's coming up, has been well worth it. So yeah, you're going to go through that 6 months or 12 months slog to get your break. But if you really want it, that's what you've got to do. Chris, which of the so-called American sports are followed in Australia? So Australia, just to give you a bit of a background of, I guess, the Australian sports market. The Australian sports market is a crazy market as far as both attendance and participation. Melbourne, I like to call, and I'll have an argument with people in London, but they're probably asleep right now. I'm happy to call Melbourne the sports capital of the world. Just a short 10-minute walk down the road. The Australian Open just finished a couple of days ago, so we have a Grand Slam. We have the Grand Prix that's coming in a couple of months' time. We have the Melbourne Cup, which is the Australian version of the Kentucky Derby here in Melbourne. Then we have 10 football teams that play out of 2 major stadiums, as well as cricket, rugby league, rugby union, basketball. And so there's about, again, I haven't done the latest numbers, but there's about 15 or 20 professional sporting organisations just in Melbourne alone. So it's a crazy scene. But that said, we love all our sports. So the NBA is big here. The NFL is big here. Lots of fans will watch their MLB at bat in Australia, and there's lots of NHL fans. So yeah, we consume. There's big, large fan bases in Australia of all the major pro sports in the US, and even if we want to add in UFC is another sport that Australians really love. Do the Sports Geek have any plans to enter the Chinese market? Not as yet. I think Andrew Collins and the guys at Marlman have done a terrific job there. So not as yet. How do you? There's another running to the run of the end of this. I'm just looking at the time because I don't want to run over. I will get to the bottom. Jordan asks, and thank you for jumping on. What's been the best digital campaign strategy you've seen run in terms of creative outcome, and explain why it's so successful? Again, that's a bit like picking my favourite child. I do like what we did with the Asian Cup here in Australia a couple of years ago, in the way we used Facebook to put the message out there, to tell people what the tickets were available, and it really complemented what Michael Brown and his team were doing in the community, to have a successful turnout for so many people and sell so many tickets in those final 4 weeks. But it was 9 months of setup to get those 4 weeks of super successful ticketing. You can listen to me sort of recap that with Michael Brown on a podcast. Favourite podcast I've sort of answered. I'm going to skip over that, and I'm going to answer Chase. First of all, yeah, I'm an Arsenal fan, and again, if you can see right at the There's a yellow. That's an Arsenal jersey up the back there. What will be a major player in the digital sports in the future? Yeah, I think it's that TV. It is that TV. Where does TV go? And the fact that Facebook have just hired someone from Eurosport, Peter Hutton, to sort of oversee what they're doing in the space. Your next sports rights might be on Facebook, and it might be on the Facebook Watch product. So it will be watch this space. Todd asked about the thoughts on esports. I'm a big believer in esports. Part of a club that can be applied to the esports space. So that's why I think if the sports biz to esports makes a lot of sense, and if you put those processes over the top of esports, it's phenomenal, because the amount of fans that are there is ridiculous. And so esports looks a lot like what I saw in 2009 and 2010 of, there's an opportunity if we can connect these two. Connect the digital fans to the sports, and esports has got the digital fans. They just haven't got a process to monetize it a lot. So selling the merch and getting them to live events and those kind of things. Once they do that, look out, and esports potentially, and if you look at the things like Gartner and things like that, there's every chance that esports will be the number one sport and leapfrog those major four sports that we know in the US. So because there's just so many people playing it. So I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna wrap up there. Thank you very much, Jeremy McPeak, for the invitation. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'll put some links in the I'm going to say the show notes because I'm used to doing a podcast. I'm going to put some links in the comments. Sports Geek HQ is where you can find everything about me. Please, if you're a student, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Say you listen to the Facebook Live and that kind of thing. And yeah, go to the podcast, type in Sports Geek in your podcast player of choice, and subscribe. And if you like it, leave a review. Leave a review on iTunes. They all help. So thank you for taking part. This was fun. I might do it again sometime. Thank you very much, Jeremy, and I will wrap it up there. Cheers.